everyone. Welcome to Data Stories and Clean Water Advocacy. My name is Emily Diet. I use she, her pronouns. I am a project manager on the community engagement team at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and we're very happy to have you all here today to learn how we're amplifying our cleanup efforts through data collection. So just a brief overview of our agenda today. I'll be doing just about a 30-minute presentation. We'll go over briefly our organization and mission and some of our focus areas for our policy work. We'll talk about why do we need data? Why is it so important to collect this in regards to combating the climate crisis and the plastic pollution issues we face here in Western New York? I will zoom in on the tool that we used to collect data and where all that information is stored and how you can easily join the data movement with us. And then I'll spotlight a few policies that have passed in the most recent past, and then we'll look at some of the policies that are on the horizon that you may or may not know about. So Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper's mission, many of you might be familiar with it, but is to protect and restore our waterways and surrounding ecosystems for the benefit of current and future generations. So we do that by protecting our waterways through testing the water and doing cleanups. We restore the health of ecosystems through doing lots of restoration efforts along our shorelines throughout the Niagara River watershed. We connect people to water, so getting them right there out on kayaks and learning about our local waterways, and hopefully through that inspiring sustainable economic growth and community engagement through workshops like this. So our work at Waterkeeper is focused on in the Niagara River watershed. And so I think all of our work is supporting this policy focus that New York is in fact a Great Lakes state. So although we border our ocean, it's really important when we're talking about any advocacy work to remind folks that we are a Great Lakes state. We are bordered by 2 of the 5 Great Lakes, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, and of course connected through the Niagara River Strait. So again, it is so important when we're thinking about to advocate for clean water here in our region, but also throughout the state, and reminding folks downstate and in Albany that we are part of one of the largest freshwater drinking sources, right, in the country, and 25% of the world's surface freshwater. So really important to highlight that, especially when we're talking about how we can take action and make change. So again, all of our work at Waterkeeper is focused on the Niagara River watershed particularly. So we have our 9 other sub-watersheds here in this map, and this is where all of that restoration and education and outreach and policy work is really focused on. So we are the drinking water resource for over 40 million people, 8 states, 2 countries. And so this work is so important to make sure that we have fresh, clean drinking water, swimmable, drinkable water for now and for future generations. So I mentioned, this is where our work is focused on, is the watershed or the land within that watershed of the Niagara River. And so I just want to do a land acknowledgement. And so I would like to acknowledge that we are on unceded, stolen land of the Haudenosaunee people, the people of the 6 nations, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and Tuscarora. And they are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. And I just wanted to acknowledge that there is still a lot of work to be done to understand and honor the treaties between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of our region. And I really encourage others not only to learn more about that history, but to advocate for and support Indigenous sovereignty. I really believe this practice of doing a land acknowledgement is important in my work to achieving climate justice, not only to lift up people, the Indigenous folks who have suffered generations of trauma and harm, but really because I believe they are the leaders that we really need right now as we seek to right our relationship with the earth and also with each other, which I think is very much connected to why we are all here tonight, right? To learn about how we can really take action to protect our region. So thank you. So I mentioned the land in a watershed. I always like to just redefine a watershed. We use that term a lot. And I think it's important to highlight that it's not just the water, right? It's the land. It's all of the area of land that drains into the streams, right? All of that storm water that runs on the land and going into that shared water body, which is the Niagara River. So again, I like to say what happens to the land happens to the water. So even though when we're doing our shoreline sweeps, or we might be doing a cleanup that's not right on the shoreline, that work is still incredibly important because that map that I just showed you before, we're looking at the waterways here, right? So you can just see the way those veins are spread everywhere. So again, when we know we have an impact or contaminants or pollution on the land, it's absolutely going to have an impact on the water. So let's zoom right into some data information. So this is really just giving us that data story, that snapshot of the data, all of the data that we've collected for our shoreline sweep since 2015. So the way we've collected data in the past is we take average weights of the bags that we have. So that's where we've gotten these figures since 2015. And you can see this data story, right? Now, there have been different number of volunteers each of these years, but on average, most volunteers collect anywhere between like 10 and 20 pounds of trash each cleanup. And that's pretty standard for each of these. So you can see 2018 was a huge year, but we had over 2,000 volunteers that year. And then obviously you can see in 2020, when we weren't able to get together at all of those sweeps were actually solo sweeps. And that's where our solo sweep program was born, was when we couldn't come together for our big annual event, the Spring Shoreline Sweep. So now, again, looking at it, we're still in 2020. Now, again, we had more volunteers in 2022 than in 2021, but not by very much. Again, to me, this story is saying we have been collecting on average the same amount of litter year after year after year. And it seems to be not really letting up. And so again, thinking about data collection and looking at that story and what it's telling us is that I think we need more solutions to this issue, right? Starting to look at the root causes of this. And the way that we can do that, again, is by zooming in and collecting even better litter data, in addition, of course, to our own advocacy efforts themselves. So last year's spring sweep, we did really encourage collecting litter data, not just on how many bags we collected, but on what exactly we were finding. And so here's the data story from last year's sweep. And, it's very similar to what we thought it was, which is that plastic is, the number one thing that we are picking up on our shorelines. So there were over 45,000 pieces of litter collected throughout the entire Great Lakes region, but here in Western New York, 78% of all of the litter pieces that were collected on CleanSwell, which I'll talk about a little bit later, were plastic. And these were the top 5 here. So we have plastic pieces. So those are kind of just unidentified plastic pieces that are getting really close to becoming a microplastic. We have cigarette butts, which are typically the number one thing we've counted in the past. And then other trash, so any type of wrappers, and then beverage bottle caps, those hard plastic ones, which last in our environment for 500 or more years. That was number 5 on our list. So all of this, I skipped number 3 there, other trash. So again, unknown pieces of trash, but a lot of that is plastic. And so really one thing that I found that was interesting here is that plastic bags weren't on this list last year. And I know in the past when we've looked at specific litter data and seeing what exactly those things are, typically in September around International Coastal Cleanup, I've always seen plastic bags. And so if anyone can guess why we're not seeing plastic bags, throw it in the chat. Give me your guess and we'll talk about it in just a moment. So as part of our spring sweep, the Great Lakes cleanup, we are part of that through our spring sweep. So we initiated a collaboration. This will be our third year with over 18 partners throughout the Great Lakes Basin who are organizing shoreline sweeps of their own. So I wanted to highlight this not only because our spring sweep is coming up, which is again part of that third annual Great Lakes cleanup, but when we're thinking about data stories and plastics, we hear a lot about the oceans, right? That is where the most dense where we're finding the most plastics. But the truth is we have a ton of plastic right here in our Great Lakes, in our fresh water, in our drinking water. And it's a huge issue, and there really isn't as much data as we need to make those big changes, solutions, policy, and studies, right? So we really do need a lot more data to show that we have an issue here in the Great Lakes with plastic. Any friends who just joined, welcome. If you could just put yourself on mute, that would be great. So just to avoid feedback. Thank you. So yeah, this information is also on our River Watch report as well. So this slide is actually something I did last year where I just made a word cloud of some of the things that our volunteers, I asked a question on a survey, what piece of waste would you like to see eliminated completely from our waste stream? And so these were some of the answers that came up. A lot of them were repeats, of course, but clearly to me, almost all of these things on here are plastic. Not a huge surprise, right? I like the one right in the middle that says everything, which we know would be very difficult, of course, but still inspiring. I think we have to dream big here. I know that removal efforts, right, and reducing our waste is so important in this, but I think dreaming big and thinking about things that we can completely eliminate needs to be also part of our advocacy work to keep us motivated, give us hope, and really think how we can make huge changes. So this slide again is kind of looking at when we're thinking about waste, some of those myths that we might have, or just to kind of hone in on plastic. Our plastic crisis is really driving the climate crisis. So our friends at Beyond Plastics came out with a report a couple of years ago, the new coal, plastics and climate change. And this report was really staggering. I didn't read it word for word, but I did dive into some of it, and really just looking at some of these figures that our plastic production is expected to triple by 2050. That's really staggering, and something we forget is plastic is made of fossil fuels, so we are trying to transition away from fossil fuels, which is causing climate change, which is increasing the heat of our planet, causing more greenhouse gases. So again, making those connections between climate change and plastic production is really important, because as we know, climate change is probably the biggest challenge our generation has met, right? If not all of humanity, right? So thinking about how plastic plays a role in that and understanding that it's a big one, I think will really help as we think about solutions in the future. And then wanting to highlight the reality of recycling, and that is that it is a broken system. It is not working, unfortunately. So what can we do about that, right? I know that there's definitely a lot of space to improve in our recycling infrastructure. And that's something I'll mention a little bit later when we talk about current policies. But the truth is, we really need to think about other solutions in addition to bettering our recycling infrastructure that we have here in the United States. Because as you can see, only 8% is getting really recycled in the U.S., and that figure really changed a lot when we weren't able to ship a lot of our plastics to China. And then lastly, wanting to highlight our ecosystems and human health, and the impact that plastics have. So we know that plastic is, drowning our waterways and impacting wildlife and the health of our ecosystems. But now we're seeing a lot of scientific evidence that, they're looking at our bodies and finding that it's in our lungs, it's in our bloodstream, it's in the things that we consume. So it's time to really, ring the alarm on all of these things, right? That, when we're thinking about new production of recycling in relation to climate change, and how it's all of these things are throughout the entire life cycle of plastic, it is toxic. Again, just a reminder, if you're not on mute, please do so. And then, so just wanting, I mentioned how we had shipped our plastics overseas in the past to China. Now, the US has looked at other third world countries that have very, low standards for their environmental policies, and that's where we've been shipping a lot of our plastics now. So those little numbers at the bottom of our plastics, I have heard in some from Beyond Plastics, who came out with that report, that really 1 and 2, that little number in the triangle, those are the ones that are really getting recycled, and there's some profit there for the folks that are doing that recycling, where we have those other ones, the numbers 3 to 5, that are getting shipped overseas, ending up into our oceans, ending up polluting other countries. And so it really is a global climate justice issue. And then zooming in at home, thinking about climate justice, the plastic production plants are typically found in low income and Black and Brown communities. So just for, I'm saying that word climate justice a lot. So I just wanted to give, my definition of that, because I think we've heard a lot about environmental justice. We know about the environmental movement, and I think climate justice is a little different because it's acknowledging not only environmental harms, but the intersection between those ecological impacts with also the social impacts, right? So looking at those racial and social inequalities and seeing that disproportionate impact on people of color in low-income communities and also Indigenous communities. So the goal of the movement for climate justice isn't not just for the earth, but really for all people to have access to clean air and water and soil. And so thinking about that word disproportionate, I think, is really important when we're talking about climate justice and climate change, and even when we're talking about litter, right? We see low-income communities typically in urban areas, right? And so that's where that's where we see a lot of that impact of climate change and other social inequalities. But really, when we're talking about litter, I feel like we tend to blame individuals, right? So we'll see like litter in, again, highly dense urban neighborhoods. But what's different, again, about climate justice is that it's looking at the root causes of some of these issues, right? So not just thinking about individuals and how they can change their behaviors to address a particular issue, but going beyond just the individual and looking at what are the structural, the systemic problems, right? That are really, again, the root cause of not just environmental injustice, but also racial and social injustice as well. This graphic here is something that I first learned from the county, who's in the process of creating they have a draft right now of a community climate action plan, and they really wanted to have equity as a focus of that climate action plan. And so this particular image I really liked because it puts out some of those terms that we throw around a lot. And so we see inequality, right, is when we have unequal access to opportunities. Then when we think about equity, it's really those custom tools that identify and address what are those inequalities. And then, of course, that bottom one, justice, right? It's fixing the system. So not only we're providing the tools, right, but we're providing additional opportunities when we're really being considerate of, what resources do folks already have, and maybe what other ones do they need. So shifting back to our data stories, is I'm going to highlight the tool that we've been using in order to collect data. So in the past, we have used paper data sheets, which is still available for people to do, but really wanting to ditch the paper and use this really user-friendly digital tool created by the Ocean Conservancy, and is a way to really rally volunteers, not just here in Western New York, but throughout the Great Lakes region. So I'll just talk briefly about how to use CleanSwell, where all that information is stored, and then hopefully you'll join us in using this tool for your own cleanups at the spring sweep, or if you're doing your own sweeps. So this is the homepage. Once you download the app, it takes only a couple of minutes to make an account, which I hope all of my site captains have done. And you have three options when you open the homepage. You can upload information related to a trash collection device. So that's something that's in the water that's collecting debris, something like our sea bin, which we have down at Buffalo Harbor State Park. We don't use this particular tool for that, but that's an example. Starting a new cleanup. And then, of course, if you've already picked up garbage, maybe you didn't tally every single piece of plastic or can that you found, but you do know you collected one medium bag of garbage, so you can always report a past cleanup. The most important thing for our purposes, in order to really manage the data in the best, most organized way, is for our volunteers to use a group name that we can identify. So making sure that BNW is in your group name is really important. If you're participating in the spring sweep, we'll have group names for each of the sites, so that'll be provided to you, of course, as a site captain and as a volunteer. But whenever you're out there picking up trash and you start using this tool, making sure you use BNW so that we can track it on the back end, which is something you have access to as well. So here is the home page. We have all different types of, trash there. Really most things I think that we find out there, the Ocean Conservancy has done an incredible job of really updating this to make sure that it's the most inclusive, to have as much trash as possible. So for instance, they may not have seen as much personal hygiene at their ocean cleanups, but here, in Western New York, we suffer from combined sewer overflows. So that means when we have heavy rain events, we have untreated sewage water going into our fresh waterways. So we do see a lot of things that are personal hygiene related, right? So that was something they took into account and added a lot more in that category to reflect some of the things that we're seeing in the Great Lakes that we may not necessarily see out in the ocean. So the list is super comprehensive and it's very easy to use. You just scroll down and you'll see all these categories there. If you have, you found maybe a whole pile of bottle caps and you don't want to tap 50 times, if you just hold down on an item, it actually pops up another screen and you can enter a larger number that way. So, you may have come across, maybe you just were enjoying the water and you found a bunch of cigarette butts that you wanted to clean up. That way you're not tapping a million times. It's just a one quick hold down. And then very important is pressing finish this cleanup. We've definitely found folks have said, oh man, I thought I, submitted it. But if you just leave your app open and you don't press finish this cleanup, it actually will not upload that information to the database. So just remember to do that. And again, just wanted to reiterate that you can always record a past cleanup. So even if you collect a small bag, you could weigh that and enter the specific weight, or you can do the average, which they have here, the small, medium, and large with the different pounds there. Where does this information all go? Well, it goes to TIDES, Trash Information and Data for Education and Solutions. So this is an amazing resource for educators, for us here at Waterkeeper, nonprofit organizations, but also for scientists. Scientists who have been doing studies on litter data are looking to this resource, as well as policymakers and organizers who are looking to target a specific type of trash as well. So I really encourage you, unfortunately, you do have to create another account on Tides, but you can really access the data without one. So if you're curious at all, you can go on and look at this map, zoom into our region, check out what we have there already. You can go back years, months, you can look at very specific times, you can type in your group name. So there's a lot of different tools here that I won't dive into today, but I encourage you to check out and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So now we'll go to the last section of this presentation today, and that's really looking at the policy end and the advocacy and the things that have already been passed and things that are on the horizon to be passed in the future. So I'm sure many of you have heard of a smoking ban or law in your area. We definitely can't smoke in parks across New York State, and all different municipalities have, implemented their own laws against smoking related litter. So that's something that's really huge. And I know that there's a group, the Kick Butts Collaborative, run through Roswell, is really focused on making sure that we eliminate cigarette butt waste here, because as I mentioned before, it is the number one thing that we find at our cleanups on average over the last several years. So it's definitely a huge issue. And I mentioned earlier that we didn't see plastic bags on that lineup, and that is because we banned them, right? So we banned single-use plastic bags in New York State. There are still some peppered around. I know we've seen them, but I think it's really incredible to see that plastic bags were not on the number one. So that means these policies do work. It's living proof right there. But again, we need that data to back it up. Another exciting ban here in New York State was eliminating the use of polystyrene foam. So if you've ordered takeout in the last year and you've gotten them in the compostable paper material, that's evidence of this policy in action, right? And if folks are still using poly, they can be reported and fined. So I haven't seen any of that, which is really exciting. And again, hoping that we cannot see any of those little clamshells anytime soon. Is always a good thing. And then I just wanted to throw on here, because New York State and Erie County was really integral into the passing of the national law, the Microbead Free Waters Act. And those are those little things that were found in some of our face wash and other hygienic material. And it was very harmful to our water. It never broke down. And again, really harming our ecosystems and wildlife. So I just wanted to highlight that as a region that was really at the forefront of that national law getting passed. So these are proposed policies. These are not passed yet, but that are out there and something I encourage you all to learn about. So on a federal level, this is kind of the holy grail, if you will, of policies when it comes to eliminating plastic pollution, and that's the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And that would really be kind of all of the things in one, right? So thinking about banning all single-use plastics, getting rid of plastic bags and single-use utensils, and making sure that producers are held accountable for the packaging that creates. So again, that's that overarching, and I think it was just reintroduced again in 2021, but could definitely use some more energy and excitement around. And then here in New York State, we have the Better Bottle Bill. So the bottle bill was revamped, was amended, would be the proper term, in 2009 with related to water bottles. But then before that, it has been decades since we have had a new bottle bill. And so this bottle bill would not only increase the return to 10 cents, but it would also include Gatorade and wine and liquor bottles. And there has been evidence in other states like Maine, like when you have a better bottle bill with a better return, you're going to see less of that litter in our environment, and the recycling rates increased. So that is on in the legislature right now. Extended producer responsibility. Now, that is not a standalone bill right now, but it is something that is in Governor Hochul's budget. Some environmental advocates want to see something a bit stronger, that's going to be a little bit more holistic in ensuring the longevity of this responsibility on the producers. So that's something to keep our eye out for, as the budget has not been approved yet. And then lastly on here, probably one of the boldest bills in the state right now is the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. So I had mentioned, there's definitely a need for stronger recycling infrastructure, but this would also be addressing the packaging reduction. And again, putting the onus less on municipalities to get better funding and infrastructure, and really putting that back onto the producers who are making massive profits, right? And so thinking about who's making over $1 million in profit a year, and who would then have to be responsible for ensuring that their packaging is sustainable, and they're looking at the entire life cycle of that packaging. I just wanted to real quickly highlight extended producer responsibility. It is probably one of the most frequent buzzwords I've heard when it comes to thinking about waste policies and waste reduction. And I just wanted to show this map. So a group, Product Stewardship Institute, I believe they're out of California, they put together this this map here to show where where we see the most EPR laws in the country. Obviously, we see here on the West Coast is in a darker blue, but I also thought it was really encouraging to see the blues in our Great Lakes states, right? So we hope the goal is to have all of our Great Lakes state blue, right? We want it 11 and more. But New York State is definitely doing a good job. We have a lot of representatives in our legislature that understand the impacts of plastics, and that we need to make a huge transition. But I think, again, thinking about, we had a law passed last year focused on carpets and better managing of that waste. But again, if we can get those stronger extended producer responsibility laws in place, that would then encapsulate a lot more products, as opposed to having these kind of individual ones that focus on a specific type of waste. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then coming back home to Waterkeeper and thinking about how data has always really been a focal point of our work. We collect that data, and then we use that then to advocate. So Nurdle Patrol is, if you haven't heard of what a nurdle is, it's a little teeny tiny piece of plastic that is kind of like where plastic products begin. So they start as these little tiny pellets. And so we have trained volunteers who go out and actually look for areas within the Niagara River watershed, particularly on the Niagara River, where we're finding these nurdles, so that we can understand where they're coming from and hopefully prevent this from happening in the future. And then River Watch, many of you know, we have trained volunteers out there collecting information, baseline data on our local waterways, and then we publish that information to the public. It's also available on our website. And then the bottom three are different bin programs that collect specific types of trash. So our friends at Niagara Muskie Association and some other volunteer groups have stewarded these reel and recycling bins. So fishing line, which is a really harmful piece of plastic, cigarette butts, as you know. And then we have 2 sea bins down at the Buffalo Outer Harbor that are collecting trash during the summer season that is actually already in the water. Keep your eye out for that. We'll be having an event in May around Waterkeeper weekend to kick off the launch of our sea bins. So what can you do right now today? Well, you're here, so that's number 1. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Number 2, if you haven't already, you should really know your representatives. So there's a really cool tool. I put a couple maps on the bottom of this slide where you can go online, type in your zip code, find out who's your senator, who are your assembly members, think about who is your municipal leader. So really thinking about who are those folks that are making decisions for us every single day, and let them know that you care about this issue. And maybe there's a particular policy or a bill or a campaign, that maybe they are advocating for that you can support, or maybe they don't know about it. And so, being that ambassador for them and bringing them the education is really important as well. So you could do that. You could give them a call. You could write them a letter. It's very powerful to do either of those things. I know it seems like a simple action, but it's probably one of the most powerful, because your voice matters. They listen to their constituents. That's their job. So again, making a phone call, writing a letter. If you're really jazzed up, you can actually meet with them, which is really impactful, especially if you have a group or some friends or family who all care about the same issue. And then, of course, volunteering, right, with a local organization who are organizing around issues that you care about. So, join us. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities at Waterkeeper, of course. So, finding an organization that shares your values and supporting their work is a really important way to advocate as well. And joining us for our spring sweep. So our spring sweep is exactly a month from today on Earth Day. So I invite you all to join. I know many of you are already going to be leaders and site captains and you're already volunteering. So I don't have to plug too much with this crew, but everyone who's listening to the recording, I hope you will join us. And ironically, today is World Water Day. When I first put this on the calendar, I wasn't so sure of that, but really excited to share this with you today. And just a note that there is the first UN World Water Conference, the first one in a generation, happening between now and the end of the week. So I encourage you to check that out as well. Yeah, I will stick around for any questions. Thank you so much for being here today. And yeah, we hope to see you at the sweep.